Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We are in the AI and virtual worlds track. I'm Lori H. Schwartz. I'm your host today, and I'm excited to introduce your next session. We are going to keep the conversation going that we began an hour or so ago about how AI and virtual beings are really impacting our world, especially in enterprise. And we're going to dig in a little deeper and talk about medical and military grade solutions. So I have these fabulous folks here, and this is Chris Lane and Kelly Duncan from 3D MD, and they are going to share what they are up to. So let's have a big hand for Chris and Kelly.
Well, good afternoon. From everything I've heard here, I realize that this presentation is probably going to start as a defense of the term avatar, which is rather fortunate because I don't know where this doppelganger came from, but it would probably take hours to talk about it. And the first part of this, I really want to talk about that avatar. And it's the journey out here has taken me back 33 years to when I first came out to the Valley to work. And it was a time much like this in early 1990. I seem to remember the plane I came over, I had 4 people on it. The recession was so bad. And there were an awful lot of layoffs going on. I came over to work for Oracle at the time and had a fair number of responsibilities in that area. But one thing I would say to anyone that's concerned about their job or anything else, get yourself a damn good job title, a good old conventional job title. And the next thing really is make sure you've got a great job description. You do that and you're going to be safe going through. So watch these chief metaverse officer kind of titles. It may not get past some of the more brutal HRs. What's our credibility? Well, oops, this one isn't it? Yeah. We probably were the first company ever to launch a commercial metaverse project. Of course, we didn't call it the metaverse in those days. We called it cyberspace. And in November 2000, I recall one weekend, the weekend of the Bush-Gore election, in fact, which was a very tense time for the computer games industry, we launched a booth which would launch you into cyberspace. In fact, there was one just a few miles away in Stevens Creek in the Barnes & Noble store. And the idea is you go in there, you'd get a medical quality image taken of you, wait for it, it would spit out a CD-ROM, you take it home and load it up into Quake 3. And what's kind of interesting about it is some months later, on August the 9th, 2001, the New York Times did a double spread page on it. I'd completely forgotten until this metaverse word came back again that in fact they'd name-checked us directly against Stevenson's book and those areas. So I think it's an interesting history, but at the same time, we also put a system that didn't output anything in the London Science Museum. That was running for nearly 4 years, and I believe during that period, it spit out, it generated about 350 to 450,000 avatars, which to this date is still probably the largest true 3D avatar farm ever produced. Now, my last slide is going to indicate what happened to that and why we don't have that asset anymore. But in the meantime, let's try and work on this job description for the avatar. It's a very important word, and I really do hope that it doesn't disappear and get trivialized as a cartoon. To me, it's something that embodies the essence of human behavior. It's been around 4,000, 6,000 years. I don't know when it dates back. And to be quite honest, our use in the virtual world is very true to its original spiritual meaning in the terms of creating different personalities, different fit for purpose, manifestations of yourself to serve different purposes. And we've got our 6 roles of the avatar up here. I'll touch on a few of these going through. You know, the one I'm going to pick on here, though, is the guardian angel. Why on earth would I want a replication of my details sitting around on the internet? Well, you know, I think driverless cars are going to happen. It's kind of cool when you go to a computer vision conference and you see all these driverless taxis running around in downtown San Francisco and you think, hang on, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, no people. And it's a big challenge we have this going forward. We're pretty good at figuring out if somebody's going to walk off the sidewalk, they had the extra bottle of wine in the restaurant and so on. We're very good. Car hasn't got a hope in hell unless we teach them. And that perhaps is one of the great messages of this conference, particularly some of the presentations. AI and the metaverse, they coexist. If the metaverse doesn't understand the detail of people, then it's getting nowhere. Whether it's a physical manifestation of us or me saying, yeah, Tesla, I think I'll let you have a signature for me that recognizes when I may have been drinking and walk out in front of a car. And I think this is where we've got to look at these particular derivatives of the avatar. But why did our little avatar firm die? Because privacy. Even back in 2004, the Science Museum in London said, we can't take responsibility for that data. It was all wiped and deleted. And it's very, very important that we adopt standards. I'm personally on the board of the Web3 Consortium. I love X3D because to me it is a perfect container for this data. It was developed in a defense world, so it has security built into it. And it's very important that we make sure this is built in. So, firstly, why do we worry about this? Well, the next part of it, I'd like to hand over to Kelly, who's going to talk about two very specific uses of avatars, their long-term usages, which have made the difference to people's lives and probably are life and death to some of the individuals. Kelly.
Hi there. Thanks, Chris. Basically, from the standpoint of what Chris was saying, I'm finding it interesting that, you know, we collect images, or we capture images of people and generate them. And we hear, oh, we need real-world data for all the new AI and all of those applications. Well, we've been using real-world data, like you said, for real-world applications for 20 years. So we got started in, oh, wait. Sorry, I jumped ahead. So basically, you're going to see a lot of images here. So what I want to do is I want to show you how we capture and render an image, so that way you have a foundation for what we're doing. So this is our 3D body system. We have 28 modular units in it with 84 machine vision cameras. The subject's going to be captured at 60 frames per second. And basically, in each one of those modular units, there's 3 cameras, a color camera and a monochrome camera, or 2 monochrome cameras, and basically it's done in a white light LED projection. So what's happening right now is we're generating the 3D mesh as far as the one capture. So we captured 60 frames per second, but what we actually captured was a progressive sequence of 3D MD images, with each image basically a separate image as far as measurement and that type of thing. So I'm going to tell you right now and right here, all of our customers to date, whether it's medical, whether it's military, whether it's the tech companies, anyone who needs or buys our systems, basically what they want is near ground truth 3D anatomical information. If you don't need that, you know, we would probably be overkill. But that's really what people are looking for, especially from the standpoint of real world data. So basically where we got started was clinical application. We got started with 2 world-renowned facial surgeons who really wrote the modern textbook on maxillofacial surgery. What they did is they had us focus 20 years ago on children with craniofacial anomalies. So we developed a non-invasive 3D surface imaging modality that enables us to capture the children non-invasively, and then from that standpoint, they're able to utilize it, especially like in cleft lip and palate. So that was one of the things there. And what the images are used for in medical is assessment, treatment assessment, and then it's combined with other 3D modalities like CT as far as doing surgical planning. So from this standpoint, they used to have to make plaster molds for children or infants with plagiocephaly. And it's quite traumatic if you see the child up in the left-hand corner. So with the 3D MD system, they're able to capture the child as he's having fun in the system and utilize that image in order to create the helmet. And basically, it eliminates the trauma and the anesthesia that was needed to sedate the child. And then quickly, basically, also too, as far as quantifying cranial shape of children with different types of craniosynostosis conditions, it was required that you take a CT before the operation and then another one after. And basically what this has enabled us to do is eliminate a lot of the radiation doses, and you don't necessarily have to take a CT after the surgery. And then we're also working with the great clinical team at Wake Forest Medical School as far as looking at a software AI-driven approach to classifying or standardizing classifications of different types of craniosynostosis, as well as the treatments. And then we'll move on to the military. So this gentleman here, basically, as we all know, ill-fitting clothes can really, or gear can really impact performance of people in the field, or soldiers in the field. This gentleman here is a member of the Georgia Army Reserves, and he came in his uniform, and he talked about some of the things he was having trouble with his uniform. So the first one here is the gear that he has in the field is he has night goggles that go on his helmet. Because of the weight and the load on it, he has to tighten the strap extremely tight in order to, so they don't fall off, basically. Unfortunately, though, if you look when the strap is tight, he has trouble drinking water out of a bottle because he can't open his mouth far enough. So that was one of the things as far as, if we're looking at design, as far as, like Chris was saying, life or death, not that he doesn't get water, but if they're out in the field, that, they need to be able to get that sustenance. Another one that we looked at there was his standard gear as far as his backpack. His torso's a little longer than some of the other soldiers. So what he had to do, because it's loose fitting and it was awkward when he was on maneuvers in the field, is he had to tighten everything and basically do kind of his own modifications to his kit. So, one of the things that 3DMD is doing is we're working with military units around the world in order to help the guys, the human factor guys that are trying to fit these guys better. So that way they're not impeded, their performance in the field continues, to be life-saving, basically. And then, like I said, real-world data has been used for those others, but it is transitioning. Those aren't the only applications that you need real-world information for. From the standpoint of, there's a lot, I see it, I haven't had a chance to walk all around, but there's a lot of headsets out there. And basically looking at comfort and fit as a person moves. It's not just, okay, here's your head and it's on there. It's like, how does it feel? Is it comfort? Is it invasive? So a lot of the companies are utilizing this type of real-world data to better design their glasses. And last year it was really great to see Magic Leap give a presentation on how they're using real-world data in order to design their latest generation of headsets. So with that, I'll hand it back to Chris. There you go.
Thanks, Kelly. So I had trouble with this slide. And I was really helped by one of the presentations yesterday. So we're talking about AI. There's something we mustn't forget. We need a base. If we want intelligence, we need knowledge. And we start looking around the world, we have very little knowledge of the nuances of the human form. And we see a lot of people trying to develop AI models really by adapting synthetic data. So synthetic data is kind of, weird. It gets progressively removed from reality. Anybody remember cassette tapes? You remember when you used to make a copy of a cassette tape, it got progressively worse every new girlfriend you gave the tape to. And that's the sort of thing that's happening with these adaptive synthetic data models. And that's a big risk that we're determining things on this. And I really wanted to stress the fact that we are all unique. We're all outliers. And that's the cold, hard reality of the human form. And I realized I wanted to put the devil is in the detail here, and I felt that really was a bit offensive given how I started talking about the significance of avatars. And I discovered actually the Germans don't use that term. Dear God is in the detail. I'm afraid God is still masculine here. So whoever's created us has made us all absolute individuals. And that's what makes a difference in perception. That's how we judge things. It's how we look at things and so on. If we don't take that into account, and I'm sorry, ChatGPT, the first time I used it, it awarded me a PhD. I mean, it's pretty grim because it didn't have enough information on me. You just assumed the job I did, I had one. What kind of mistakes are we going to get with the human form with this? So if we're going to use these avatars and look at this, it's very important that we feed that learning model with something in there. And so, we've broken these out in here. people talk about using mesh recovery to develop AI applications. That's recovering a mesh from a 2D image. How accurate is that going to be? So the goal here is always to get that sub-millimeter accuracy. And although an optical scanning method can never be actual ground truth, the goal is to be near ground truth. And that was why it was so important that we had our great 10-year initial excursion when we couldn't get into the cyberspace, wasn't quite ready for us, and focused on the responsibility of accuracy. But it forced another issue with us as well, which is efficiency of workflow. In a medical environment, let's face it, a parent probably has an attention span of 2 minutes. A nurse has about 40 seconds. A doctor has 10 seconds and a child 0. And so if you're working in that kind of pressure environment, it's very important to get that through efficiently. So that's the kind of things we want in there, is to connect those worlds together. The important thing is then to analyze it. This is replication of the slide that Kelly showed with looking at the details in the ear. So our world here is a lot about human ergonomics, size, and fit. That's a very interesting piece of the anatomy. There's an awful lot of things you can put behind there, but you need to get accurate to about 100 microns of that when somebody goes through. But you've got to be able to prepare that quite cheaply. So the key thing is then, how do we take this data and how do we analyze it into something? Well, the beauty is basically these 4D sequences are a replication of the outer surface of the human body. So once we've got that, we can then start using inference to relate it back to things that are more familiar. Here we've taken a skeleton and we've actually matched that into the 3D model. So it's very much compatible with FBX. FBX is probably moving on. I'm quite excited about the HAMIN stuff that's appearing. I was a bit dubious at first, but the chances are soon we'll be using actual variations of skeletons to relate back in here. But as you can see, the capability in here, we're not just tracking that body movement, but we have so much rich information on the face and hands, we're able to track those simultaneously. And that's never been done with a parametric model. Most of the models out there at the moment, the synthesized models, have taken a separate face capture, a separate hand capture, and a separate body capture, and tried to merge them in that common environment. So aggregating this data, we begin to see that kind of power. This is pretty resilient to occlusion here. So the first one we saw was a classic training set, but here we're adding complex occluded actions. So we're beginning to look at his hand movements in the context of this. I'm afraid it's a bit jittery here. I'm not quite sure how we got down to HD when a lot of us are working in 8K now, but so I'm sorry about some of the jitter on that one. And then back to the face. So not only can we do this, but we can now put this back into another conventional tool, which is the deformable mesh. So here we pulled it back. Sure, we've decimated it down to maybe 40, 50,000 vertices, but those vertices now are replicating that action. So we've used the ability to analyze those sequences of data, pulled it back into that, and that again is a learning model for looking at this information. Now, these are things that we do internally. There are also things which our customers do in the context of trying to find those areas. Now, our development team have a very simple goal. Whenever they produce one of these correspondence models, they are required quite randomly to stop the deformed mesh at any one stage and compare it back to the original donor frame. And if you can't do that, you are again diverging from reality. So that's a very important area. Now, it won't be as fundamentally accurate because obviously it's been decimated, but the expectation is the ratios will remain the same, and that's the key thing. And here we're doing exactly the same thing in the body. I mean, most people usually show an A to a T pose on this one, but we've got some nice little stretching of the polys around the rump end of the model in this case, showing that action. So the beauty is we're moving on. We're using that rich data to generate something that's more meaningful and more usable. So we see a kind of divergence in this because in one sense, we're able to aggregate that data in an anonymous form to start producing more meaningful parametric derived models of the human for that basis of learning. But equally, we're able to look at an individual and compare them back into that reference base. So there's two things going on here. One is we're beginning to educate that AI environment with real data about people. But the second thing is we're able then to fine-tune it with those nuances, the detail that represent us as individuals, which will become more and more important. why are we moving back to cartoon avatars and not using real world people? It's incredibly difficult and expensive to sustain that model. And AI, as many speakers have said, is the only solution to that. But it ain't going to work unless you've got the original rich data in the first place. And that's the purpose of this. So here we see complex gestures going on. This is more a qualitative slide than a quantitative one. But let's move back to these details. I mean, we've only done one here, but it shows that in any one of these derived avatars, we can actually look at what's going on here. So arbitrarily, we've placed a few circumferential things on there so we can see as he goes through that squat, which was the homologous mesh just now, how different parts of that body are there. We have as many of these as they like. Now, you couldn't have done that with markers. It would have been very difficult with markers. They would have slid off that tum, I think, that he's got on him and things like that. So again, we're able to keep the familiarity of the past, grow forward it, but to look at that in a dense and more realistic environment. And this one is definitely still qualitative, although we have actually managed to rig that with a skeleton. But this is the sort of things you begin to see. This is what AI is going to pick up. You look at, she's very fit. She's undergoing professional training. I think she's a cheerleader, isn't she, at university. So she's having professional fitness training. But look at that ripple going through her thigh. We would not have expected to have seen that. But when we break this down in slow motion at 60 frames a second, we're beginning to see things we've never seen before. That we're quite capable of seeing as humans. But a generalized model's not going to see that unless we train it. So what's going to be very interesting is feeding this type of performance into an AI database with a rich form of data. Hands were our big market during the lockdown, and they've continued that way. Nobody was scanning people for a year, but people took a lot of opportunity to start understanding gestures, hand movement, interaction with hands, and so on. I mentioned one of the avatars in there is a robotic copy of you. Again, that was touched on another presentation. The ability to do complex activities. Remember one of the big places where COVID spread was chicken factories, because no one could figure out the intricate movements of chopping a chicken accurately. Ooh, that must feel to say, without this. So the ability to look at complex human movements close up and interaction with objects is there. This was how we tested. This is in a system that actually has a performance table. It's aquarium-grade glass in which you perform on it. And we're changing the battery in a mouse, which we all know is a particularly fiddly thing, especially Microsoft mice, which seem to be worse than most. So we can see we've got it. Now, sure, it goes in and out of conclusion, but remember, this is 60 frames a second, so we've got prior frames that show the compression of the fingers that go in there. Again, very rich data in that respect. And then this one is actually rigged with using 2D views, to be quite honest, unlike the ones that I showed in the 3D, but again, just showing how we can take that data and rig it back into a more conventional fashion to enumerate that movement. And, I haven't said much about visual avatars, but guess what? You get one for free. Here we've simply taken the textures which in there, which to date we've been using as part of the input for the dense processing. It's been a mixture of geometry, texture information between frames. But here we're adding different light effects, normal maps, and so on, to make sure this could be basically imported into a higher resolution, potentially even 8K environment. Now that avatar could also be used for fitting his headset and everything else. The good news is this is multi-purpose data. We don't give up on the avatar farms. In October 2019, just before everything closed down in 2020, we did a project with Imperial. This was a body system we put into the Science Museum. This time we got the data consents, the IRBs right, and I think it was running about 2 hours a day. The lines were horrendous. 4,600 body avatars at 30 frames per second were captured. First 15 seconds doing conventional hand to T-pose. Second, we said, hey, put your street clothes on. Perform, do something interesting. Now, what an interesting database. Winter in London, people in street clothes, and using that to try and infer what might be happening underneath. Remember my car example, it's got to work in the winter as well as the summer. So that's why this avatar is important. Right in the middle, you've got that data. You choose, that avatar is secure, you own it. You choose what is licensed NFT through any of those diversions. There could be many of these. And that's the importance of looking at an avatar on this. The most sophisticated avatar we've ever been involved in was the Human Longevity Project, which was Craig Ventnor. And he had this facility down in San Diego. You'd fly in on your helicopter, you wrote a check for $50,000, and he would take a CT scan, MR scan, DNA tests, swabs all over the place, skin tests, and so on, and present all that inside a 3D MD avatar. Now, that's what I call an avatar. I guess I was beaten to the post by this morning when we saw the speakers in it actually on the stage, but that's how we should be thinking of avatars going forward. Partnerships. Everybody puts up a slide now with their customers. We can't do that because most of our customers are secret and they're under strict NDA because of what we're doing. So let's talk about our digital partnerships. The first thing is equipment with equipment. A lot of what we're doing is training other devices. So in other words, there is no reason in the system where you can't put another device in line. A lot of people put connects in there where they're writing software for it. Great, I love it because it creates something useful and then it shows even more what we've got to learn about the human. It's a great idea. So we can produce composite calibration models between other equipment. We can link it in to APIs, which are driven automatically. There's sync in, sync out, great pictures of the equipment. We've got satellite-driven time stamping within the system as well. So it can work in a cooperative environment. It can work with mocap. And you can therefore look at all the time of whatever device you're training as coming back into a ground truth environment to compare that. And it's something we encourage with our key customers. So mocap a lot, but often we are not aware of what devices are being trained. They kind of sit under a cloth when we're there. We leave the room and then we go back in, they're back under a cloth. I don't know, but I've seen a couple of them beginning to get launched here. And then avatars with people and things. So, here he is answering his phone. This is one of the protocols from this. Here we're looking at the skateboard interaction. And then finally, I'm going to leave this one, interaction with clothing, and we'll get on this one, two people in the same system together. Remember, love at first sight. Just imagine freezing those frames and seeing the eye contact. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what we need to train the metaverse with AI going forward. Thank you for your time.